John, it is great to see you. I know we spoke a couple weeks back, just getting ready for this conversation, and thought that there would be folks out there who are trying to figure out a lot of the stuff around go-to-market and motion and how do they bring on more customers. I thought this would be a really interesting conversation to have on the podcast. So thanks for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm good, Mike. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So let's share a little bit with folks about your background so that they've got some context as we jump into this. So give us a little bit on your background.
Yeah, sure. So I started out after college. I was a tennis coach for a few years and was digging that for a while, but I realized, hey, this isn't really what I want to do the rest of my life. So while it was good and the job was good, I pulled the plug and I got into, I wanted a remote job. So I started working remote. My first job was doing solar lead generation. So that was my first job. Actually, it was one of the best learning experiences. I was able to work with a scrappy startup, and they gave me a lot of responsibility, and I learned a lot. I was doing full sales cycle, managing the accounts. I did everything I was doing contracts, invoicing, and it was really good experience. And so from there, I had multiple jobs up to this point where I was doing full sales cycle, really learning how it works from sourcing my own contacts, setting up sales calls, following up, dealing with people ghosting me, making sales, and then sometimes doing the fulfillment. So I got experience in different industries. Then about 6 years ago, I started working for a lead generation agency. And after about two to 3 years there, I spun off and started LevelUp Leads. And so that's where I am today. We serve clients. Really, I mean, some pros and cons here. We can work with just about anybody. We have small startups, 5 to 10 people, some of them backed by YC, other funded companies, other bootstrap companies, but also all the way up to companies on the New York Stock Exchange. So they're publicly traded, they have thousands of employees, but those aren't quite as common. We're typically in that 50 to 500 employee size range, and they're working with us, and we're helping them with sales development, building pipeline, and setting up appointments so they have more selling opportunities.
So what are the specific problems that you're solving for folks? I know you said like building pipeline, getting, so let's just go through a couple of the core problems that you solve. So what do you solve for?
So yeah, we're essentially like an SDR service, and there's a few different reasons I could walk through them why someone might want to engage with us. Mm-hmm. One could be they just simply don't have the bandwidth to do the prospecting work, pay for all the tools. They may not have the budget to do it, so they want to outsource that. It's a high turnover position if you're hiring internally. It can be expensive if you pay for the salaries, you pay for all the tools, you have to pay somebody to manage that. And so we're essentially taking that off their plate at a much lower risk and a much faster go-to-market within a week or two. So those are probably the biggest ones right there.
So
there's a few other reasons as well. But
let's talk a little bit. Let's talk about what an SDR is. So for those who've not had an SDR inside their business, what is an SDR?
It's a sales development representative, someone going out to the market and developing new business, oftentimes targeting somebody who's never heard of your company before, and you're learning about them. You're telling them about what your company does and trying to drum up business.
What kind of experience does someone who moves into an SDR typically have? So you're talking about an SDR role inside an organization. What level of experience might they have in sales or go-to-market typically?
Typically, they have 1 to 2 years of experience in some type of sales. Now, sales is all over the place. It's all over the world, right? And so for me, when I told you I had that first job of doing solar lead generation, I had to use teaching tennis as sales experience. And people may not think about that as sales experience, but I had to say, hey, look, I had to get new clients. I had to get repeat business. I was essentially selling myself as a product. And so you wouldn't think of that as sales, but people have sales experience all over the place. They may be working at retail. You can use a story and kind of mold it to your advantage, I think, to say you have a sales experience. And so I think a lot, but with sales, it's a lot of this personality. I think that's more important than necessarily having the direct experience. like I'm sure you or me, like I could go into a new job in an industry I don't have much experience in, but I could learn, right? Put in the time to learn and probably do a good job. And so those are some of the traits you're looking for when you hire a new SDR.
So when somebody is going through this kind of process and thinking about bringing on an SDR into their organization, what are some of the common like misperceptions that they have around what an SDR is going to do for their business?
I think a lot of them are set up for failure.
Okay.
And so it's important to have some type of process in place for them to follow. A common mistake is people want to hire an SDR thinking they will create the process on their own, which just typically isn't the case, right? You're hiring someone somewhat junior to come in and do this business development for you. But if there's no structure, you're kind of setting them up for failure. And so what we often look for is past experience, showing some type of proven process, and that's going to be something they can follow. But if you're expecting if you don't have a sales process in place and you're expecting to hire someone to come in and do that for you at a junior level, I think a lot of times without the tools necessary to do it, you're going to be wasting your money.
When you think about someone in this role, is it too early to bring in an SDR if there's lack of product market fit inside a business?
I think so.
Why?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
First, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Why?
I'm happy to share mine. Why is it? What's the challenge with bringing on an SDR into an organization if you do not have product market fit or a lack of sense of product market fit?
I think the founder or someone who's starting a company should do that themselves first and start to understand who their ICP is, understand the product market fit, the types of companies they should be reaching out to. It'll make that job much easier if you do hire an SDR once you have that figured out, right? Now, if you hire somebody and you have someone to kind of coach them and you can assume it's not going to work out right away and you can use them as, give them 6 to 8 months or even longer to try to help you through that, that's okay. But you have to go into it with that expectation, knowing you don't have that in place and they are going to help you find that, but you can't be holding them to some quota if you don't have those, if you haven't done it yourself or you don't know what that looks like.
Yeah. So you'd asked about my perspective as well. I think you've nailed it. Number one, don't think that you're going to go in there and you're going to bring in an SDR and all of a sudden they're going to create or find a number of leads that are going to convert into opportunities for you inside your business if you aren't able to provide them with a bit of direction and some guidance around who does what and what problems they have and why they might work with you to solve for a specific problem. There are many people who've read books out there where predictable revenue was one of the big ones way back when, where they looked at this kind of segmented sales force, a specialized sales force where you create individual roles and the founders will come in and they'll think, well, this worked for Salesforce, it's going to work for me. And I'm going to go ahead and bring in an SDR to do this. And then they want the SDR to kind of figure it out without the process, without the framework, without the background of what works. And it's almost like they expect there to be some kind of magic. And typically what I've seen happen when they're looking for this role is they're saying, if I just have a conversation with a potential customer, I can close the deal. I just need to have more of those calls with the customer. And if they're not able to get those calls, what makes them think that someone in a junior role or an early career role or an early stage role is going to be able to figure that out on your behalf? And if you think that's going to happen and you bring that person in and you give them, let's say 90 days to perform, you're setting them up for failure. You're wasting your time, their time, your money, and their potential when they could be out there doing something better for another organization and really making an impact inside that organization rather than trying to be the magic bullet or the quick fix that happens inside your company. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's very fair. One other thing I see this happens with some of our clients is we deal with product-led founders who think they know sales, but really they're just really good at their knowing and building their product. And sometimes they don't have any other option. You got to go out and sell it. But what's tricky is someone who's never done sales trying to do sales, and expectations around it's just when you have done it before, and whether it's cold or inbound, your expectations are different. You understand how some cycles work. You understand how buying behaviors work. And if you haven't done it before, it's sometimes tricky to deal because you're dealing with the founder of a very good product, but not really a clue on how to sell it. And that also goes, if we do set a meeting for them, we will sometimes get recordings of them doing the demo. Doesn't mean the product's bad, but them giving the demo is not pretty. They just don't necessarily have those natural abilities of carrying on the flow of the conversation.
How much of it is driven by their, and I don't mean to lead you with the question, but I'm going to do it. We'll figure out if it ends up being a good question. How much of that is driven primarily by them being so close to the product and so close to the problem and so close to the solution that they feel like, if I just talk more about it, the other person is going to see the light and they're going to go ahead and move forward with it because it just makes sense. Because why would you not want my product? It's perfect and it's exactly what you need. So they focus more on them than their customer. Is that what you've experienced, or have you seen that kind of behavior happen?
I think it depends a little bit on the situation and the resources that company might have. If they're quite small and they're just trying to really get more customers and build out where their ICP is and where they should be targeting, I can see why a founder would do that before they hire somebody. But I think it's better to get somebody else, unless they're all product-led founders, or maybe there's only one founder. But if you have somebody else that can just carry on a conversation, you can have the talking points. You're close to the product. I think just getting somebody that can carry on conversations better will help sell your product better. Like you can, when you get on a call with somebody and the guy, regardless of what they're selling, like that guy really got me from point A, from point B with confidence. Like they're just good at selling. Like that's kind of what you need, is you need someone that can just talk smoothly and talk about the pain points and relay the solution clearly. And I think sometimes people that are more technical, unless you're selling into too technical products, sometimes they lack that.
So let's talk about the advantage of bringing in an external resource to do this. How can an external resource do this work? And why would I want to work with an external resource rather than just building that team, building that capability inside the business from the beginning?
Well, there's pros and cons to both, right? You can hire internally and be a big success, but it also could be a disaster. The reason why is, so if you hire internally, you've got I'll walk you through some of the things you're going to have to do. You're going to have to source the talent. So you may have to hire an agency. You're spending time doing that yourself as a manager, right? Then you got to interview, you got to hire, then you got to pay for their salary. Obviously, commissions are likely involved. You've got the entire tech stack that you're having to buy to support this person. You have to spend the time to train this person, get them up to speed. It could be 2 to 3 months before they're fully ramped. All that to be said is like, it doesn't mean that person's going to be a good fit either, right? There's a lot of turnover in sales. So I've seen it where you get all those things in place and the person quits or they're not a good fit and you got to restart. Meanwhile, you're still paying for the tech that for that first person. You might be trapped in a year-long contract and you have to rehire and then start that cycle all over again. So there is risk involved in doing that and it's expensive. So the benefit of hiring an outsourced agency is you don't have to do any of that. You hire the agency. They typically come with all that stuff included. and you implement within a week or two. For us, we don't even charge our clients until we launch the campaigns. So you don't actually start paying until you start the outreach. So there's that right there is a huge cost savings, time savings, and just much lower risk. Now, not every lead gen company is going to be a home run, right? So you got to do a little bit of vetting there. But there is there should be pretty clear points as to why companies want to outsource. Also, to add on to that, prospecting is probably the most challenging the most challenging part of the sales process. People don't want to do it. Cold calling is not fun. You're just constantly dealing with rejection. And it's what people typically want to outsource. And companies that are paying their team internally, they want to pay them where they're typically going to be more experienced and they want to be in front of customers making sales, not list building and prospecting and sending out LinkedIn messages.
Yeah. And so just from an experience standpoint, I've not had good experiences with bringing in outsourced SDRs. I have a level of skepticism around it.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that it doesn't work. And you've got some great case studies of where it works and how it works. I think the challenge, at least for me, as I go through this, or as a leader of revenue teams and working with organizations and working through all of that part of the process, is figuring out, from a buy versus build perspective, do I want to buy the capability and be able to turn it on and have it work and have it go through the iterations so that I can start getting data quickly? Or do I want to build that capability from the ground up and test and iterate and learn through that part of the process? So if you're comfortable with the idea of outsourcing things and buying things to move things forward quickly, an outsourced SDR agency can be absolutely amazing when you find the right one. Let's get into some of the common things that you're starting to see. And one of them that you had mentioned when we were talking before is this whole idea of maybe going into outbound a little bit too early. What's that mean? How could you get into a situation where you end up going into outbound a little bit too early? And what are some indicators that might be the case?
Well, we touched on a few of them, just not having that process actually defined internally. But some other ones are you'll sometimes we'll work with clients and they will have a few customers. They are starting to get a little bit of traction, but they're in a crowded space. And there's lots of things. I think there's lots of little things. By the way, this stuff has changed over time. So up to this point now, what people are doing with now, more and more companies have their online presence is getting bigger. Their branding is becoming bigger. And if you don't have the little things dialed in, I think you're going to lose to the competition. And let me walk you through a few of those little things. Let's say I send you an email or a cold call or LinkedIn message. You kind of are, hey, actually, this was kind of on my mind. Maybe not right now, but you're interested a little bit. You'll go to the website, you'll check out their LinkedIn, you'll type their name into Google and you start doing a little bit of research. If you're not meeting the expectations of that prospect with your website looking good, maybe reviews on Clutch or G2, if you're not whereas the competitors, but it might be A+ on all these things. And if you're not looking the part, people aren't going to engage. It's just the reality. They might look for a competitor that looks more trustworthy, right? These people, if they don't know who you are, you're just someone sending an email. And I think a lot of times you're going to lose interest by not having those little things in place. Some other examples of a social presence, right? Is your LinkedIn profile just blank, or is it completely built out and you have lots of examples, lots of connections you're posting, and it just looks like a lot more of a, okay, yeah, I want to engage with this person. This person looks like an expert in this space. That is really helpful with lead generation, right? You're creating interest, but I think there's an extra step involved that a lot of companies are failing to address. Some of the websites of companies that come inbound to us, they look like someone in high school did it. And you can't expect people to take you seriously if that's how your website looks. So those are a lot of the little things that I think companies fail to address if they really want to up their outbound game.
Yeah. Well, it's a powerful thing to work through or discuss because you might not think about it. You might think about, when I get a referral, I'm able to generate business and they may not go take a look at the website. They may not go deeper because there's already some level of
Exactly.
trust. But in one of those instances where you're talking about someone who doesn't know you, hasn't had that experience, you've piqued their interest a bit and they've gone out and they go out and look at you and their experience is inconsistent with the experience that you created in that outbound motion. So now all of a sudden things aren't aligned. You lack a bit of integrity, lack that structure, which will ultimately create a situation where they may end up looking at it and saying, I'm interested in this, but let's see who else is out there that I might
Exactly.
want to engage with. So I've heard a couple of things. Number one, make sure you've got your website up to date and that it aligns with what you're communicating. And you've got some proof associated with that demonstrates a perspective in the social media work that you're doing. Hey, I want to get out, or any of the things that are changing in this early stage motion of I want to get it out into the marketplace, or even a little bit later stage. I want to get out in the marketplace and I'd like to think differently about how we might do that.
One thing you touched on that I didn't mention, but you were just talking about the proof. That is one thing I forgot to mention that is very important. Case studies. Mm-hmm. So sorry, I said reviews, but really case studies on your website. Can you do what you say you can do, or do you have past experience with other as a referral? A lot of companies can't do that, or they don't have the case studies. And I actually was guilty of this too for a while. I didn't really put much. I think the first year of my business, I didn't put much effort into that. I was just like, yeah, next sale. And if I didn't do that and start getting all the case studies and building that out, there's no way I would be where I'm at today. And so I think it is important. You may not realize it as you're maybe focusing on your product or your service, but it is very important to build those out because it's just going to build more trust.
So when you think about a case study, what are some of the things that go into a good case study?
Showing results, right? I think you can show where it started. They came into us with X problem. Here's what we do as a company, and here's how we solved it. And if you can show the actual step-by-step of how it all worked, even better if you can get quotes or a video testimonial and put it all on that same page. Yeah, with images too, right? Any type of images you can show, that just shows like a much better, compelling case study than just typing up a few different bullet points, right? I just think that just completes the case study, makes it look that much better. Even if you can get the actual individual in that company to be okay with you putting their name there, I think that goes a long way.
So we've talked a bit about the value that inside an organization and from a getting out into the market and getting in front of people who maybe don't know who you are today, but once they understand or know who you are, they may end up turning into an opportunity or a potential customer at some point in time. We've talked about the importance of having that website in place and the consistency that's there so that when that engagement happens, that there is something that's helping to support a conversion or enabling the buyer or the decision maker or the person with the problem to continue to move forward. Where does sales process come into play once the engagement has happened? So it's this first engagement has occurred. Now, where does sales process start to make sense to document or come into play into this part of the equation?
I think it makes sense to start documenting this from day one, right? And it doesn't mean it has to stay that way. It can change and evolve over time. Some of it might have to do also with the sales cycle, right? So if you're able to sell something within a few days versus a year, that process is going to look very different, right? How many touch points, follow-ups, getting other decision makers involved. So it will vary based on sales cycle and deal size. But one common mistake I see with the companies we work with some of them are great, right? Some of them are fantastic. And you can tell right away with the materials they're sharing, recordings, process, they have it dialed in. But a lot of companies don't. And they lack internal materials to share. It's a red flag, right? If you can't share even just like an up-to-date deck or video, anything, case studies, we talked about that. But the process isn't quite there. They don't follow up with leads, even after whether they show or don't show to the meeting. They tend to have tend to approach it where it's like, hey, next up type of thing, rather than working the deal or working the contact a little bit to better understand when the timing might be right. So when that timing is right, they're top of mind. And you'd be surprised how many people remember you and love that you did a good job and followed up when you said they would. Simple things like that, just following up and doing a decent job. And people remember you and they'll throw your name into the hat when it comes time to making a decision on whatever you're selling. And yeah, I mean, I could go on, but I think there's certainly things that are like the process just isn't quite defined. And that's when you start to see turnover, expectations aren't being met. You're not hitting quota because there's no clear process involved for the sales cycle.
I think one of the things that's interesting, I find all of this stuff interesting, primarily because I am a people and process person. And I understand the value and importance of process and firmly believe that process is always out and it happens either organically or by design. And my preference is to lean more toward by design, taking organic cues to be able to do it right, with the view that if the process is followed, results should also follow. Like you should be able to understand where your conversion points are, where your stresses are, and what could help smooth out that process. Why do you think organizations or what's been your experience on why organizations struggle with the idea of just documenting basic processes or starting the documentation process of gathering process information?
Well, I'll tell you one reason why it's difficult. And I can also speak to this because it happens internally here at my company too. But you may document something, but things are like, especially with smaller companies, you're always changing things. Tech stack, headcount, you may create new positions. And so you may document something, but it's always evolving. So you need to really for me, I hired somebody to do it. I know it's not my strength. I hired somebody to make sure we're documenting these things because it's all ever changing, and just to be able to go in there and constantly be updating these things, it's a pain, but it's important, right? If someone comes into your company, let's say you make a new hire and they don't have some type of structure to follow, they're lost, right? So you have to have it doesn't have to be perfect, but you have to have something for them to follow and have a sense on, especially if they can do it on their own. And it just makes it that much easier, right? You don't have to be training them, having calls with them, at least as much, not all the time, right? It can just be more like, hey, you do this 70% on your own and 30% we'll do together until they're up to speed.
Whether you look at process from the standpoint of internal customers, like the people that you bring on, or external customers who are paying you to do something, you're bringing them on, there's still this onboarding process. And what I'm hoping people will start to look at or think about this, that people will start to think about in this context of everboard. So there's this onboarding process and everboarding process. Onboarding that first maybe 90 days that someone gets into the organization, and sometimes it happens at a kind of a T- version. Part of that onboarding process includes the hiring process that they see. And if you don't have a documented hiring process, I don't know how you can expect to get consistent results in bringing in, knowing that you're going to make effective decisions with the right people, identify areas where there's a lack of fit, and you help them exit out of that process, help them move forward, which increases the likelihood of success or probability of success that they'll be successfully brought into the business and then successfully start performing inside the business. And then over time, realize there might even be other ways that you can develop that person so that they can make a bigger impact on other parts of the business. So there's this process that's happening, and a lot of people think that it happens just as things go along. Like it just is part of their daily workflow. And the challenge with that perspective is that daily workflow creates a lot of opportunity for reacting. So you start to react to fires that are going on inside the business or fires that are going on inside your customer's business. When you're reacting to fires, you're not controlling the narrative, you're not controlling the situation, you're not in a position where you can guide internal or external customers as they move forward through their process and move forward from a conversion standpoint. And what will end up happening if you don't do this is you'll create a lot of waste in your business. And if you overcomplicate it, you will create a lot of strain in your business. So just like John's talking about here, there's a balance that occurs. And may not necessarily be your expertise. So bringing in an external resource to help you do this will help not only help you focus on the things you do really, really well, but they will also help you identify some of the blind spots that exist inside the business because people are just doing them in the background and you don't know that it's happening. It's not process for the sake of process. It's process for the sake of performance. So really powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Anything else to add to that?
The way, one thing I'll just jump in real quick is, and this may be useful for people listening, is it can be challenging to create a new position and have onboarding and processes in place if that position never existed before in your company. But one thing you can do is, tell the person coming on, look, this is newly created. You're the first person moving through this. But once they do get up to speed 2 or 3 months back, 2 or 3 months in, have them go back and be like, okay, what was missing that you now know that needs to be added in there? So for that next person, you're able to get that in there and they're able to, I guess you fill in the gaps for that next person that comes on. So you can use them a little bit like an example to, as first person to go through. Okay, what is now clear that wasn't when you started? Go back and add that.
And with tools like Google Docs, just a simple collaborative tool, you can keep track of those notes in the context of one-on-ones that you're having with that person as you're building this in flight. And if you're open with the person that, hey, you're building this in flight, learning together, they'll be more open to sharing. And everybody starts to feel more comfortable with that documentation. And so take John's point to heart. Even if it is the first time and it's okay that you don't have the process in there, take time to reflect and go back and document and get that information in there because it will ultimately help the next person. And then from that person, you're going to learn a little bit more and it will help the next person after that. John, one of the things, sorry, go ahead.
No, the only thing I would add to that is the other thing, and I'm like, no one wishes this will happen, but you just don't know if that person that just went through that process, maybe they find another job, maybe they have something happen in their family and they need to leave. And so if you don't have this stuff documented, the next person that comes in is just kind of in the dark again, right? So you always be updating those processes because you just don't know. Person may be a great employee, but life happens. You just don't know what's going to happen, and it's best to get that stuff updated.
So let's talk about the lead gen process. So getting it back into what you can do from a level up perspective. How does that process work for you? And if we want to test on me in the context of live testing on a podcast, I'm happy to do it. What does that look like? What questions do you have for me? What can you share? Would you like to do some live testing?
Happy to go through it. Yeah. What do you want to work through?
So give me so one of the things that we're in the process of doing is we're shifting our business. Most people will know me as a fractional revenue leader. I will still do that in the right instances. Typically, those will be referrals where people who know me and know that we're going to be the right fit, they'll go and do that kind of stuff. It is not the thing that's firing me up, right? Getting me really excited. I believe that there is a significant gap in both our homes and in our businesses when it comes to leadership. And I firmly believe that if we help people be better leaders of self, then we will create better leaders both in the home and in businesses. So that's the thing that's kind of keeping me up at night. It's how do we
like that portion more?
Yeah, I really like that portion more. So
Okay.
because I think it's going to have a much broader impact on the world and then will ultimately solve for some of the revenue challenges that organizations have. And the thing that got me here is as I do a lot of the work inside organizations from a revenue side, I've realized, and this is going to sound obvious to people who've taken a number of bites of the apple in these kind of roles, but that revenue challenge inside the organization may actually be a culture challenge in disguise. And culture starts with leadership, and leadership starts with self. So the culture challenge that happens, it relates to how people think about our customers in the business, how they think about revenue producers inside the business, how they think about how all of these pieces inside the business fit together. Well, to solve that culture challenge and perspective around how we fit and how we work well with each other and how we do what we do ultimately, which is my definition of culture, we can start with building better leadership capabilities, which improve our ability to move forward, which is by definition of leadership. It's how we move forward. We can do that through a combination of mindset, skill set, and tool set. So I believe if we start solving it at the front line at an individual level, our people will thrive, our teams will thrive, our customers will thrive, our business will thrive, and everything will work out that way. And it's just a different approach to the challenge. So my challenge is a couple of fold. Number one, it's a rebrand. So how do I go from the revenue guy to the leadership guy? Is one part of it. The other part of it is based on a couple of hypotheses that I have around. So those are the things. So I'm struggling with a rebrand. I'm struggling with going out and testing in a new aspect of the market, and very easy for me to test within my own network, which we're already doing. And we're starting to see testimonials on different landing pages that we have. So is that enough context to give you to help with a discussion around the lead generation process on that side?
Well, I have lots of questions.
Fire away.
Is there a particular organization type or size that you would work with on this leadership development?
Yeah.
So does it not matter? It could be any.
It could be anything, but it doesn't. I know it's not useful to say it could be anything because yes, there are going to be most organizations that you talk with as you go through the process. You'll say, "Okay, would you like to build better leadership inside your organization?" And a lot of people are going to nod around it. But do you think that you provide that support, or what support structures do you have in place? Well, I coach my team or whatever their thing is. So the area that I'm focusing on or where I'm testing here are in enablement and emerging tech organizations that are larger than 250 people. And and I like to test in three areas. So emerging enablement tech, larger than 250 people, because typically they're going to run into some of these organizations structure challenges, and they'll run into them probably at that 50 and 150 stage. 250 that got a little bit more meat and opportunity to test in some other areas. The second area that I'm testing is in construction. So these are the organizations that are building a lot of the buildings that are around you that are struggling with bringing people into their business and struggling with solving for the hiring challenge there. And some of that is functionally related to either culture or leadership inside their business perspective. And then the third area that I'm interested in testing is in oil and gas. And the oil and gas and construction space are going to be they're aging. People inside those organizations are aging out or starting to age out. And we're looking to bring on that next level of employee inside our organization and that next level of leader inside the organization. The emerging and enablement tech area is interesting to me because of the business transformation side of it. So that's how I would describe the types of organizations that I'm focusing on, and it's across those three. So oil and gas, construction, and emerging and enablement tech.
Okay. And because going within your network is going to be a lot easier. You're going to have ins, you're going to just create those conversations with ease. Now going cold is different, right? And so question for you, is there any way to know someone might need something like might have a cultural or leadership change, like turnover? Like, how could you identify that as you go out to do outreach? Is there anything?
A couple of different things. So one is growth. They're growing really quickly. One of the challenges when you grow really quickly is you tend to find an individual contributor who does like their job really, really well, and you move them into that first manager or director, or even depending on stage, even into a VP role. So we're looking at high growth. Another one. And I typically I'm looking at percentages there. So year over year growth in specific functional areas of greater than 20%. So I'll use something like LinkedIn Sales Navigator to organize based on that, right? So that would be one indicator. A second indicator would be churn. So high churn inside the organization from a people perspective. So on one side of the spectrum, you have high growth, and on the other one, you see this exit that's happening. Where things get really interesting is if they have high growth in one area of the business and exits in another area of the business, because now you're seeing this disconnect where either something's changed. Now, it could be because of a change in go-to-market and an approach, and it could be a strategic change that's happening, or it could be an indicator of friction that exists inside the organization. So those are, I guess, three. We're shrinking, we're growing, and we're diverging.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that seems very logical to me. And I like that you brought up Sales Navigator, because they literally have those exact functions to figure those things out, which a lot of tools don't, but you can figure that out exactly on both point 1 and point 2. So easy to target there. Next question. Does your website reflect this leadership? Is there enough on there if someone do any cold outreach that they can go to your website and easily see this is what you do?
It's a great question. And I don't think there is. So that's one of the things that we're kind of working through. There's a lot of stuff around execution, which is one of the core leadership skills that I believe is out there. I have 5 core skills that are out that I discuss, which are problem solving, decision making, achieving results, so execution, designing for success, that process type stuff that we were talking about before, and communication. So those are the 5 skills. We have landing pages set up that will speak to the challenges that exist inside organizations when you're missing those skills. So problems and pain that exist when you lack those skills, benefit when you solve what changes that future state that changes. But I don't believe that our website is very good at this point in time. It doesn't serve that purpose. If you go to the sales website, which is the revenue leader piece, which is still up there on a top nav, that's the old Catalyst sales site. That does that very well, because that's been the core of the business since launching it 8 years ago.
Okay. I think that's okay. Like, even for us internally, we have a new service we're rolling out, but it's not on the website.
Yep.
But we're testing it to make sure it works first before we put it up. We actually just got our first sale from it. So it's like, I think that's okay. But if this is a big chunk of what you're doing, it might be worth considering if this is the direction you want to go. Here's what I would say is, I think the first 2 points that you brought up about the company growth, as well as the churn in headcount, you could run 2 campaigns around those for outbound, and with the messaging would have to be pretty good. Maybe some examples of companies in they're similar to them and how you help them. But I think some of the best way to get new clients for you would be stuff like this podcast, but doing webinars, newsletters, getting more of like a little bit of a following, in the sense that you're kind of warming people up. I certainly say test out the cold outreach, but I think you're going to do better that way if you have like a little bit of interest from a following. Like I said, newsletter, you could do stuff on YouTube, the podcast, and you get people that are attending those, and you can start warming those up. I think that's going to be a much better route than cold outreach. But again, you'd have to test that out and see because essentially, think about it. You have a little bit of an indicator on targeting some of these companies, but could be a little challenging, I guess, to get a lot of yeses from that. But if you get, the following, and you can start warming up some conversations, I feel like that's a much better end.
How do you think about bringing all of those together at the same time? So the combination of both outreach inside the network, demand generation through some kind of value add, whatever it is. And I know a lot of people like to talk about value add type stuff, and value is in the eye of the beholder from my perspective. So we cannot impress value upon somebody else. It's up to them to determine, hey, this is something I value or I don't. So doing some of these value added webinars that are focused on the pain points and the challenges that exist, and then ultimately some solutions, practical solutions in that area. And then maybe some kind of conversion metrics that happen, some place where people are able to share information and start to enter into a journey. Because a lot of the webinar stuff is going to be really high top of funnel type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then bring in some outbound. How do you think about taking all three of those together and building a story around that?
Well, I think all the stuff you mentioned about creating that demand gen, even some other ones would be like social or even going to events. But what we found is when we work with companies that it's not strictly cold, and we have like they go to a conference or they have some type of, they know who the company is, right? Or some type of, hey, we're going to go to this conference. We're going to have a booth, or I saw you at this event, or you came in down to our website. Anything that's not pure cold outreach helps the campaign so much. And so if you have some type of point that you can be like, hey, I saw you there, or speaker XYZ was so great. Like anything that you can just break the ice a little bit helps so much. So by you doing that demand work, and then you have maybe somebody under you that can help with the legwork once those come in and work them a little bit, I think will lead to success. Right.
So, and the thing I really like about that is now you get yourself into a situation where you're not dependent on one strategy working and only that strategy working. So if everything is so focused on outbound and you're testing in that area that's so focused and your expectations are super high because of the timeline that you need that return on investment, you may ultimately be setting yourself up for failure. So create some space where you're not taking on all of the risk of this is my one channel or my one area of focus. I think that's something that's come across really clearly in the conversation with John today. So John, thank you.
Yeah, of course. I don't think it's smart to dig into one channel. Yeah, don't put all your eggs into one basket. You just don't know what's going to change over time. And maybe, for example, cold email has just become harder, right? So if you got to have other channels to get leads and ultimately make sales.
And this is where I think working with an external resource can be really valuable, because you can continue to focus your time, energy, and attention and internal resources on this without having the distraction of building a new team. You can kind of figure out this thing. Hey, is this the right motion for us? What else do we need to have in place? John, I really appreciate the time today. Where can people connect with you directly and find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn, John Karsant. I don't think there's anyone else out there with the same name. I started posting a little bit more on Twitter, so you can find me there. Same thing, John Karsant, or head over to my website at levelupleads.io.
Awesome. If you know somebody who would enjoy this conversation, get value out of this conversation, get to a point where they start thinking different so that they can do different as a result of this conversation, please share it with them and let John and I know via both LinkedIn and Twitter. Those shares help get the message out. People should not be lost when it comes to struggling through these challenges. And I think a conversation like this can be really helpful for those folks that are out there. The shares help draw more attention to the podcast. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently?